Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year and belated happy holidays and all that. Hope you all enjoyed the holidays and that you're enjoying the freshness of the new year uh, now that we've hit the wonderful month of January. I personally, I don't hate January. I kind of like January a lot. It's February, March that I don't particularly love. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you for all the nice comments and subscriptions and etc. It's nice to make a video again. But I haven't had much to talk about that I haven't said already. So in this video, there is something that I sort of wanted to talk to you about, um, and it has to do with the whole New Age movement concept. I received for Christmas a tarot deck called, and some of you probably have used it before or own it, the Sacred Circle Tarot. I hope that's not backwards for you, because it's backwards for me and the camera. But anywho, Sacred Circle Tarot, which is a pagan-based deck, and this is a very different perspective for me. Excuse me, and it's not. I'm not saying it's a wrong perspective, but it's a very different perspective for me because I tend to be more either, I suppose, Neoplatonic, Kabbalistic slash Christian slash Thelemic. And paganism is not something that has ever particularly appealed to me. But I got this deck for Christmas for whatever reason, so I've been reading the book and trying to assimilate the information as best I can, because I believe I got it for a reason. You know how these things work. Um, so I'm trying to learn the lessons that it's there to teach. And one of the things that I don't quite love about it, because I've actually kind of come around to it. The deck is fairly attractive. It's a pretty nice looking deck. It's well made. The book is well written, and I, being a medieval kind of medievalist or whatever, what have you, I really find that that era of pre-Christian Britain and Ireland very interesting. So it's kind of cool to read about this stuff, uh, and sort of connect it to the archetypes of the tarot. But what I particularly don't like is the book was written by Anna Franklin, and Ms. Franklin basically suggests that the tarot is a pagan Celtic invention originally, and that it has acquired Christian and Kabbalistic symbolism incorrectly over the years. As you can imagine, this sort of makes me boil a little bit because I'm so obsessed with tarot history and traditional tarot. And whether you believe that the Kabbalah is the foundation of the tarot structure or not, which it probably was not intended to be in the first place either, though it still works, um, I think it's pretty clear to me anyway that the tarot is not does not have much basis in in information and mythology that came from the other side of Europe. It just doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. It's possible that some of the ideas maybe migrated during the Hundred Years' War, though that seems kind of unlikely to me anyway. She bases this idea on some article or some book about, I don't know, the Vita Merlini or something like that. I don't know. That apparently contains some of this symbolism and supposedly predates things like the Visconti Sforza deck. I don't know about that. Sort of seems to me like pseudo history, especially when a lot of these archetypes in the tarot uh, really just espouse either medieval history or Christian theology or Neoplatonic philosophy, which is why the tarot bridges so easily into Kabbalah, because Kabbalah is basically Jewish mysticism with a very healthy dose of Neoplatonism. You know, it really frustrates me when people disregard that basic historical and very obvious aspect of the tarot and insist on these kooky, non-historical bases for the origin of the tarot. It doesn't make sense to me. Look at what's there, and it will sort of be obvious to you if you know anything about Neoplatonic philosophy. It's kind of obvious, even just the idea of all the virtues being there, and of course prudence. I don't think prudence is is the hermit, as some people recommend. Uh, I think prudence is the chariot, personally. If you're interested in this sort of thing, the cardinal virtues and the Christian virtues that are supposedly present in the trumps. But anywho, my to get back to my point about the Sacred Circle Tarot, my even bigger issue from a philosophical standpoint. Get down from there. I have a very bad cat, by the way, who drives me crazy. Gets into trouble on purpose. But my big problem philosophically with this tarot and this book in particular is its sort of roundabout way of talking about the divine masculine. It it doesn't talk about it in a way that I find philosophically all that great, frankly. It as many of you know, paganism is very much focused on goddess worship, and in some ways does place the goddess on a tier that is slightly higher, I think, in importance than the masculine. And I know that pagans love to talk about the co-equality of the sexes and all that. Uh, I don't really see it reading this book or working with this deck. It sort of is a very matriarchal tradition, which is fine. It's just I think that religion really does have to be co-equal, and it has to be co-equal in the way that Thelema spells it out as co-equal. That the Aeon of Isis, which is this whole pagan tradition, and the Aeon of Osiris, the whole Christian tradition, do need to be wedded in the modern era in order to create a synthesized philosophy or religion that embraces nature as it is and science as it is, but also the philosophy of the spirit, I think, which is, I think, meant to be understood as more masculine. Um, you can argue against that if you so choose, because of course the fool is androgynous ultimately, who does represent in many ways the spirit. But anywho, I think that that's sort of where the New Age movement in general kind of falls short. The New Age movement is so much based on the revival of things like paganism and the revival of women's role in religion, which is wonderfully important. Um, but the idea, I think, is, or has to be, the inclusion and synthesis of the two. We can't just say that all of Christianity is incorrect or is no longer valid. And we cannot say that all of paganism is invalid or wrong. It really has to be a perfect fusion of the two. And reading this book, I don't see a perfect synthesis of the two. And reading Christian material, obviously, is totally not a synthesis of the two at all, which is why I don't think either of them are destined to work for humanity in the modern era. I think you have to learn from the mistakes and the triumphs of both and apply them in a way that is more holistic and integrated. And I think that's where Thelema really shines, in that it is predominantly a celebration of the Holy Guardian Angel and of the personal Godhead as one's personal teacher and guide. And that one's interpretation of religion is ultimately filtered and, I suppose, cultivated through this personal genius or deity or whatever you want to call it. Familiar, it has a lot of names, of course, depending on what tradition you do align yourself with. And I think that's just incredibly important. It's a truth, and it's a truth that I think is very much along the lines of pagan monotheism. Nuit as the goddess suggests both the unity of life and also the multiplicity of life. And Hadit does the exact same thing. Hadit, as the point, represents the uniqueness and multiplicity of life, but also the unity of life. So there are two ideas that represent very much the same thing, even though they represent duads. And their child, or their offspring, being Horus, the god of vengeance and destruction, is really interesting to me. That the holy guardian angel, as a guardian of revelation, is a destructive force primarily, and is something that destroys our perceptions, our incorrect perceptions. That I think is so fascinating, and I think that's where we need to go in terms of religion. I think we need to embrace the idea of polytheism, but we also need to keep in mind that, while the morality of Christianity might not necessarily be desirable for any and all people, um, some of its philosophies about about God as man, I think, are very crucial to understanding the whole picture. And I think the more the New Age movement tries to shy away from that and tries to ignore that, or take Christianity and filter it through paganism, like this book kind of does. It always interprets the masculine through the feminine, and it really can't be that way. They are separate ideas and yet unified ideas. They are co-equal. They are two expressions of the same life force. That's terribly important, if you want to get a whole picture. So, I don't know. I've always been wary of the New Age movement, personally, because it sort of opens this very dangerous door to people in a way that Protestantism did, frankly. Protestantism I also don't particularly love either, because it basically says, both the New Age movement and Protestantism say, that it is okay to interpret something for yourself, whether you have the tools to interpret it or not. And that is a way that religion has never been, ever, in human culture. And it is dangerous, whether it's more liberal, whether it's more free, whether it's more modern per se, whether it's more liberating, is sort of irrelevant. It's dangerous because there are doctrines that the average person does not necessarily have the tools to digest or interpret. This is just a basic fact. If I don't know anything about rocket science, should I be working for NASA directing pilots in up in space? No, of course not. That's dangerous. That's reckless. And the same sort of thing, I think, is applicable to our spiritual lives. Ultimately, we as miniature beings do not have the tools of our own volition to interpret and digest spiritual truths, simply because we feel that we're individuals and we have the right to do that, and who's going to tell me what to believe? That's not how it works. And that's why the Holy Guardian Angel is so important, because the Holy Guardian Angel is the meeting point between grand spiritual doctrine and personal interpretation and personal uniqueness and individuality. It's the crux between the whole thing. And that's why it's so important. And it mitigates those two aspects of life in a perfectly harmonious way. It's why it is associated with Tiferet, which is harmony and the beauty of harmony and the meeting point between macro and microcosms. It's incredibly important. Um, we can't disregard that. Uh, so I'm trying to think where I was going with this, because I lost my train of thought. This often happens, as you know. But basically, the New Age movement giving so much freedom to people yeah, I have seen it only produce people that don't really know what they believe in. If you ask the average person today, especially the average person with a brain, um, what they believe in as far as their spiritual life, most people will tell you, or a growing trend anyway, is that they will tell you that they're more spiritual than anything else, that they consider themselves spiritual. Um, and I don't really know what that means. That's like asking, I'm looking at a bowl of fruit. It's like asking a fruit, what are you? And the fruit says, well, I'm a fruit. It doesn't really tell you much of anything. I mean, humans are spiritual in nature, I think, and also rational by nature. And to say a human being is spiritual is sort of just like saying a human being is a human being. It doesn't really tell you anything defining. That is basically an easy way for the human to tell you, or the person to tell you rather, that they haven't really solidified what they believe. They don't really know what they believe. They might as well be agnostic or atheist. It's too holistic in the sense that it doesn't really. Your religion at that point does not become an expression of who you are. And religion has to be an expression of who you are, because who you are is your connection to the bigger plan and is your connection to God and is a reflection of God. Your uniqueness is everything. It's how you fit into the big puzzle of life, which seems like a chaotic swarm of stuff that doesn't seem to make sense, but at its core it does. And it does through our adherence to being who we are and who we are intended to be. So I just think that we need to be more wary of these spiritualities that sort of insist that anything is a go, or that anything is valid. I mean, this is sort of like saying that the cult that makes you drink the Kool-Aid is valid because it has a spiritual basis. Clearly, no. I mean, things like, dare I say it, Scientology, really, no. Uh, if I may even go so far, I have a huge bias against Mormonism, frankly, because I think it's a sham, and is an irresponsible religion as well. I've become very biased lately, and a lot of you like to talk about how gentle I am, but as Jesus once said, those of you who think I have come bearing peace are wrong, because I have come bearing the sword. Sometimes I feel like that. It's not all sun and roses, the New Age movement, and I think it blinds itself into thinking that it is. And as a result, a lot of people don't make much spiritual progress. And the same thing is happening to Christianity, because Christianity won't embrace the personal aspect and won't embrace the multiplicity aspect. It is inherently stuck and won't ever get anywhere. It is destined to fail. Both of them are destined to become defunct if they do not revise themselves and make some kind of marriage. And I think that's where Thelema does step in, and even though it has clearly not come to define itself as a fundamental modern philosophy or religion, it certainly, in some ways, is in the shadows. It is the ultimate destiny, I think, for human spirituality in the new world. I'm going to ignore that. Of course, we just finally passed the big prophetic date. I'm so sorry about that. It drives me nuts. I hate landlines. I want to get rid of my landline so badly. We've just passed the big Mayan date of 2012, December 23rd, blah, 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 whatever the heck the date was. And a lot of people were talking about how it was to represent kind of a bigger spiritual transition into a new world. Um, and I think that's kind of already happened. I think that was the point of the Book of the Law and everything like that. is to say that the modern era is here. The modern era is incredibly different from anything that has come before it. Um, and even just, I think the proof is in the pudding. Just look at the internet. The fact that I can turn my computer on and talk to 100 plus people about what I think is truth is pretty mind-boggling. And it does open you up to the wider reality and a lot of different ideas that previously were not part of the human condition. It's pretty shocking how rapidly the world has changed to something entirely different from anything preceding 1900, basically. It's a very different world. Previously to that, everything sort of made vast changes every 100 years, but it was still sort of the same world. And now it's a very different world. It is a brave new world, so to speak. And I was talking to someone the other day, an older woman, and a very nice lady, and we were talking about religion a little bit. And she said, the thing that I see most in the current generation or in modernity is a lack of moral compass. And I thought, how true is that? There is uh, no guiding morality anymore for people. It's not as obvious anymore. And I think the whole focus on the HGA, the Holy Guardian Angel, or the true will, sort of synonymous, it is that moral compass. And it takes work to get there. It takes work to find that, as many of you know, I'm sure. But it is the most important work, capital W work, that you can ever do in your life. And it's the most rewarding work. It's the most difficult work, the most important work, but also the most rewarding work. And I think that is the solution to many of our problems. And until we come to that point, the modern era is going to continue to be a violent hodgepodge of chaos in many ways. As long as people are struggling to figure out who they are and why they're here, the world is going to be a very destructive place, I think, and a very aggressive place. I think mankind is very much struggling once again. I mean, we've always struggled with it, but I think we're sort of redefining the struggle of what it means to be both an animal and something that isn't quite animalistic. And how do you strike a balance between that, and what does that mean for you? What does that make you? If as Nietzsche said, if God is dead, which it basically is on its way to becoming in the modern era, then what is your purpose? What are you supposed to do? And I think that that's where something like paganism does help us, because it can at least say you are part of a bigger picture, and by being a natural being, by being yourself as you are meant to be, you are doing what you're meant to be doing. That can be incredibly important, but it doesn't add the allegorical layers of Christ's parables or Christ's mythological life, and the idea of the crucifixion, God in extension, and many ideas relating to, well, I suppose the psychological development that both really talk about. I mean, paganism, of course, talks a lot about life, death, and resurrection, and rebirth, and all that, blah blah blah, as does Christianity. But Christianity defines it in a way that I think is a little more in depth. I mean, paganism sort of just looks at the world and says, well, the world does this, so therefore we do that. But Christianity, I think, tries to talk a little bit more about that in a more layered and deep way that I think is important to talk about and remember. You know, I don't know. I mean, it's such a cluster of lots of things right now, and I worry so much about the state of the world, as I'm sure many of you do. It's so bleak right now in many ways. If you look at even just the Connecticut shooting, I mean, I think in some ways that has represented the end of the world. You know, I don't think in some ways that was a fluke. I mean, we so clearly have entered a period when violence seems to be the answer. Man's egotism has become so inflated and so disgusting that people can look at that event and defend the practice of owning guns like that. It's hideous to watch. It's really hideous. Man is really rearing his ugly head in the modern era. And I mean, it's just we tend to ignore our own pride. And I think that that is where we lack morality and where things like Christianity do come in handy. It doesn't mean that you have to efface yourself constantly. It doesn't mean that you have to put yourself out for everyone else around you. But it does mean that you and I, we are all inherently sinful creatures. He who believes that he is without sin is a liar. And there is so much truth to that, because sin is disobedience and sin is pride. The belief that that your way of seeing things is inherently correct and no other way of seeing something is appropriate or valid. It's terribly destructive logic, and it's terribly human. And there's a grain of truth to it, and there's a tremendous danger to it as well. And again, it's about synthesizing the greater truth and the human truth. I think that's what the Chariot talks a lot about too, is that we cannot be fully spiritual beings, because if we were fully spiritual beings, we wouldn't be able to function in the world as it is. But if we were fully practical beings, fully earthy beings and animalistic beings, we wouldn't be able to progress or become anything more than what we already are, which is sort of basic and undeveloped. So we have to become a being that is neither fully one nor fully the other. That perfection is a state of mitigating the difficulties of both, being the charioteer and directing both forces of our nature. I don't know. This has gone on a long time. It's almost half an hour long, and I've sort of just rambled. But I think it all does kind of connect and fit in. And these are just things that I've been thinking about over the past month or so. And these are things that I feel very compelled to talk about. I think at this point it's safe for me to say that I have attained knowledge and conversation to a pretty fair extent, and there are just things that I feel and think and feel like I have to say, and if I don't say them, I feel like I'm not doing my job. So I forgive me if it comes across as a little preachy. A lot of my videos lately have been preachy, or my posts have been preachy, but it's not because I want to be preachy. It's something that comes up from within me that I can't stop. Sometimes when I'm writing posts and things, it doesn't even feel like I'm writing them, and a voice just sort of comes out. And I know that sounds really odd, or even again, kind of egotistical, but it's something that I can't deny anymore. Anywho, so I hope, if anything, that's food for thought, and can start a conversation or anything like that. And as usual, if you have any questions that I either haven't already answered or there isn't information on my blog about, by all means, shoot me a question. I'm in the middle of doing a big reading now. I'm going to try to work on that for the rest of the day. But after that, I will be available for readings, which you can, of course, always access on my blog if you're interested in ordering a reading. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you got something out of it. All right, take care, and bye-bye.